Michael, to hear the experts say that if you manifest any number of symptoms like easily distracted, blurting out an answer before you're asked, daydreaming and looking out the window, fidgeting at your desk, unable to sit still, that these are symptoms of this mental disorder called ADHD. What do you think about that?
That was me. All those things were me. You know, seriously, if this had been the way things were run back when I was growing up, you know, always asking questions, always seeming a bit agitated, always, you know, my mind drifting off into some, you know, creative place. I'll tell you, they would have had me so doped up, you guys never even would have heard of me. It just, there never would have been a Roger and me or anything else.
How many students have you seen would come to school bouncing off the walls in the morning, and you change their diet or make suggestions to parents, get them off sugar, get them off dairy, and then they come back and they're okay? Does that happen?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Get them off TV. Yeah.
Get them off TV?
Yeah.
I used to think, you know, 10, 15 years ago, when we were raising our daughter, people would pop The Little Mermaid in the VCR. You know, the kid would watch it 29 times, and that became, you know, the pacifier.
And no wonder they can't pay attention to something for 20 minutes, because when they're watching television, their brains are becoming lazy from the visual input that they're getting from television.
Can tell what child watches television before he comes to school in the morning. Can tell you as they walk in the door.
How? Why?
Because they're out of control. They're not being themselves. They're being some character. They're acting in a way that's obviously not them.
What we have to remember is that children's behavior is a product of what they see in their homes. In this fast-paced society, their parents are often on the cell phones, pacing back and forth. Well, the child's not blind. The child's going to see that. And the child is going to imitate what the parent is doing. I
now long for the days when I saw people popping The Little Mermaid in 29 times as the pacifier. Because that's not the pacifier now. The pacifier now is pop a pill in their mouth.
Isn't it amazing that suddenly there's a new disease that jumped over all these, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, our generation, and suddenly our kids are the first generation to get this new disease.
Right, and of course they call it genetic.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
It's likely that a 10-year-old boy in 1960 would not be supervised by as many adults as he is supervised today. From the moment he wakes up today, he is looked at and observed and driven and taken different places, whereas probably in 1960 he would get a chance to run around with his friends for 2-3 hours. There was an increased sense of perhaps safety that the parents felt, and this child would be interacting with other people, would not be spending most of his time either in darkened rooms in movies or watching television or playing by himself with electronic toys. So there would be much more social interaction in that child's life than you would see today.
ADD is not new. ADD was actually described over 100 years ago by a pediatrician who described a group of kids who had short attention spans, were impulsive and hyperactive. Ritalin was actually released in the United States in the early 1950s, so we've known ADD has been around for a long time. However, there are clear societal factors that are increasing the expression of ADD. As we require kids to stay in school longer to get the best jobs, ADD kids drop out first. And if they drop out of school first, they have babies first. So actually ADD families have more families per 100 years. So they'll have 5 generations per 100 years, where a non-ADD family will only have 4.
My grandfather was born 3 years after the Civil War. That's my grandfather. You know, I'm still a fairly young guy, so do the math there. That's, you know, only 2 generations back takes me back to the Civil War, and a grandfather who was alive when I was alive. Everyone got married late, it seemed, through the generations in my family, and had their kids late. The benefit of that, though, is that I got to hear real stories of what it was like in the 1860s and how they lived, and what the evening was like, what the evening meal was like, how everyone, of course, not only ate together, you grew the food together, you prepared the food together, you ate together, and then after dinner, you would go into what we call the living room now, and you would read together, you would play music together, and that's the way my grandfather was raised, that's the way my mother was raised, and that's the way I was raised. There were musical instruments in the house, the television was not a babysitter, discussions were had, and that is not what's going on now.
I mean, when I was raised by two perfectly normal, probably extraordinarily loving parents who happened to have been President and First Lady, there weren't drugs for kids. There wasn't a need. There wasn't I don't remember the label ADD ever being used when I was in high school or grade school. So no, it's not something that my parents had to deal with.